All right, strap in because today we have a good one. We're going to go deep into the world where AI and biology meet. There's this press release about evolutionary scale and their AI model ESM3 that's been causing quite a stir. We've covered it previously in the video about how this model is able to basically simulate something like 500 millions of years of evolution into a few months of computer processing. So I won't bury the lead here. Here's the big headline. This AI can actually create completely new proteins. And that's a pretty bold statement. This is something that takes Mother Nature hundreds of millions of years, billions of years. That's the crazy part. We're not just talking about analyzing proteins that already exist, but actually designing and building them from scratch to meet certain functions, certain specifications. That's like a whole other level of control over the building blocks of life. It really is a whole new frontier.
Subscribe for more sweet AI content.
So let's start with evolutionary scale. Who are these people? What are they all about? Well, Evolutionary Scale is an AI research lab that just kind of popped up on a scene in 2023. And they're all about shaking things up in biology. Their goal is to make biology programmable using AI, which is a pretty ambitious goal. Being able to program biology, that sounds like something straight out of science fiction. But here's the thing. These folks have serious credentials. They're the same team who developed ESM1 back at Meta/Facebook, which was one of either the first or one of the very early protein language models. So of course we've heard about AlphaFold, built on Google DeepMind's sort of alpha backbone. But this is a little bit different. This is like a large language model like ChatGPT, but for proteins. To put it simply, that basically means teaching AI to understand the language of proteins. And they snagged a cool $142 million in funding. So clearly some big players believe in what they're doing. That's a good sign. So they've got the brains and they've got the backing. But what about this ESM3? What's the big deal with it? So like I said, we covered it in great detail in a previous video a few months back, but basically what ESM3, now this is of course generative AI, much like ChatGPT and others, it doesn't just analyze data. It creates something new. It generates something new. And get this, it was trained on a data set of 2.78 billion with a B, billion proteins. I can't even wrap my hand around that many proteins. It's an astronomical number. But what does that mean practically? Well, think of it this way. Imagine giving a kid a library with 2.8 billion books, all on the subject of proteins. They would know everything. They would be a protein expert. That's ESM3. It has that kind of knowledge about proteins, from tiny bacteria to giant redwood trees. So it's like a protein encyclopedia, but on steroids, right? So that's a great way to put it. It's a massive, comprehensive knowledge base. But what makes ESM3 different from other AIs that study proteins? This is where things get more interesting. Most AI models that look at proteins focus on their sequence, which is kind of like the orders of letters in the words, right? So amino acids make up the protein. The sequence that they're in and the shape in which they fold gives the protein the function. But ESM3 isn't just looking at the sequence. It goes way beyond that. So it looks at the protein's sequence. It also looks at its 3D structure. Think of it like origami. And its a function, what that protein actually does in a cell. And that's what gives it the ability to design these new proteins from scratch. It's like it understands not just the letters of the protein alphabet, but the grammar and the entire story. And the best part is we actually have actual proof of this, actual real-life applications. So Evolutionary Scale made headlines with what they call the GFP breakthrough. This is what our previous video covered. Now, GFP stands for green fluorescent protein. It's that stuff that's found in jellyfish that makes them glow, make them look all pretty and shiny in the dark. I'm sure you've seen pictures of underwater glowing jellyfish. It's pretty cool stuff, pretty amazing stuff. And scientists have been using that protein to light up things inside of cells, right? Kind of using it like nature's little tiny flashlight. So we've been able to kind of like use that protein that we found in nature, right, that got evolved naturally in, for example, jellyfish, right? And we've been able to kind of identify it and use it. That's nothing new. But ESM3 actually created a brand new GFP. And it's one that's completely different from anything that's found in nature, right? So out of the hundreds of millions of years of evolution, all the various different proteins that sort of evolved naturally, this one has not. We haven't seen it. But the ESM3 made that protein that doesn't exist naturally. It's something that would have taken, let's say, hit reset on the old planet Earth, right? And then had evolution just start over at the beginning. So maybe then it would have taken nature like 500 million years of evolution to come up with this specific GFP, this shiny protein. So that's kind of mind-blowing to think about. Imagine compressing 500 million years of evolution into a few months of computer processing. That's pretty wild. Now, how they did it is they asked this model. So think of it like ChatGPT. I mean, say a language model is just the language isn't, letters, English letters or whatever. It's the language of proteins, sequences, and functions and structures. So they asked this language model, ESM3, to produce some potentially new proteins that glow. So they said, this function that makes a protein glow, give me, 100 protein structures or ideas for proteins that might glow like that. And this model did. They took, the best ones that they thought might work. They tested them in a wet lab. So basically they tried to recreate them. And they found that a handful of them, they kind of had some glow to them, right? So they selected those, they went back to the language model and they said, okay, you're onto something here. Here's the one that really is what we're looking for. So you got close. Give me a bunch more like that. And so the language models went, okay, I get it. You're looking for something like that. And it produced some more sort of samples for them to try out. And lo and behold, one of them was a brightly shining GFP, green fluorescent protein. And those, by the way, have really strange sort of structures that are very uncommon in nature. It's actually quite bizarre that something like this could evolve naturally. But the point is it found one that has never evolved naturally, that shines brightly, and is a brand new protein we haven't seen before. So that's the power of ESM3. So it's not just cool science. This has some serious real-world applications. We're talking about things that could impact us directly, like drug discovery, new materials for building or for batteries or for superconductors, perhaps. Even things like maybe capturing carbon from the atmosphere. These are all areas where ESM3 could make a huge difference. But before I get too carried away here, let's bring it back down to Earth for a second. How accessible is this technology, right? So is this going to be locked away into some high-tech lab where us mere mortals can't really actually get our hands on it? So here's where this kind of gets wild, because Evolutionary Scale is legitimately, they're committed to making ESM3 accessible for science. They have an actual open version, like an open source version of ESM3 that's made specifically for researchers. They're running a closed beta API for folks working on specific applications. They're even partnering with big players like AWS, Amazon Web Services. They're partnering with NVIDIA to make this technology more widely available. So they're not just hoarding it for themselves. It does seem like they really want to democratize access to this powerful tool, which is fantastic for the future of research, development, biology, because simply it means that more smart, brilliant people can get involved and explore the potential of ESM3, maybe even learn how to create some improved version of it, perhaps. The point is, we've got this AI that can create new proteins. For example, like the breakthrough that they have with GFPs, which is basically hitting fast forward on evolutions. You can say simulating evolution to come up with new sort of designs that we haven't seen before. It's like accelerating discovery in a way we never thought possible. And they also have a commitment to making this technology available to the wider scientific community. So where do we go from here? It's really mind-blowing how fast things are moving in this field. And what's exciting about Evolutionary Scale is that they're very aware of the possibilities, and they also seem to be very aware that they need to be responsible. So they keep using this phrase, making biology programmable. So what does that even mean in practical terms? It's certainly a bold statement, but imagine for a second being able to design and build biological systems with the same precision and control that we used to design, software or build machines, factories, similar to how you would engineer an ergonomic chair or a mouse, right? We can engineer, life. At least that's the ultimate goal. So instead of relying on nature's random mutations and slow evolution, we can actually engineer solutions to problems that have been around for centuries. You can think about designing completely new drugs or biomaterials with unprecedented precision and effectiveness. But let's get specific. So we talked about applications like drug discovery and material science. What are some concrete examples of how ESM3 could actually be used to tackle some of those challenges? So let's start with drug discovery. And by the way, AlphaFold 3, so from Google DeepMind, they've recently also saying that they're making their tools more accessible to everybody. And they're the ones that are talking about drug discovery. Demis Hassabis, the CEO of Google DeepMind, is talking about potentially curing disease in the next 10 or to 20 years. From the interview with him, it sounds like he's saying either all of disease or like the vast majority of stuff that plagues humanity could potentially be solved if we really figure out how to create these designer proteins, right? But for example, imagine using this ESM3 model that we're talking about to create proteins that can target specific disease pathways with incredible accuracy. This could lead to treatments that are way more effective and have fewer side effects than anything we have today, right? So our pharmacology isn't always the most accurate, right? When we design drugs, when we create drugs, we basically try stuff out and then we're like, well, it seems to do this, but it also has all these, side effects. And we try to kind of like test things out and hopefully improve them, but it's kind of a crapshoot. So being able to create proteins for specific diseases that are incredibly accurate, that could lead to treatments that are way more effective. Number one, that's important. But two, they have fewer side effects than anything we have today. So instead of a broad spectrum drug that can sometimes feel like you're hitting a mosquito with a sledgehammer, we're talking about laser focused treatments. And it goes way beyond just treating existing diseases. We can use ESM3 to develop preventative therapies. We can identify potential drug targets way earlier. And we can even personalize medicine based on your unique genetic makeup. So imagine personalized medicine, personalized supplements, right? Tailored to your DNA. For example, I personally, and I know many other people in the world, have a mutation in a very specific gene, the MTHFR gene. If you have a mutation in your MTHFR gene, you probably know the other not so nice way that people refer to it as. People sometimes refer to the MTHFR as the mother FR gene. And if you have it, there's some supplements like methylated B vitamins that you might need more than other people. And there's other vitamins like folic acid that you should avoid. So having personalized medicine, having personalized supplementation that's tailored to my specific DNA with the weird MTHFR mutations and whatnot, well, that would be incredible. And also, for example, what about material science? How could ESM3 shake up things in the material science sort of industry? Think about designing proteins that have specific properties, right? Like incredible tensile strength, flexibility, even conductivity. Designing a superconductor may be possible. ESM3 could help create entirely new biomaterials for everything from sustainable packaging to advanced electronics. We're talking about materials that are not only high performing, but also biodegradable and environmentally friendly. This, of course, would be a complete game changer. We could even see the development of self-healing materials inspired by nature's own regenerative processes. That's straight up out of a science fiction movie. And regarding carbon capture, for example, could ESM3 play a role in addressing climate pollution, for example? Absolutely. One possibility is designing proteins that can bind to carbon dioxide with incredibly high efficiency. they would essentially act like molecular sponges to remove it from the atmosphere. So instead of just trying to reduce emissions, we can actually pull carbon out of the air. And keep in mind that ESM is accessible. Evolutionary Scale is making efforts to make ESM3 available to researchers. Now, the question is going to be, is that enough? What about companies or even individuals who want to use this technology? It's one thing to make the tech available, but it's also equally important to ensure it's accessible to those that can actually use it to develop real-world applications. It's not just about open sourcing the code. We also need to make sure there are ways for people to apply it through partnerships, educational resources, or other support mechanisms. We need that whole ecosystem to work. And one other thing to keep an eye on is the development of even more powerful AI models capable of handling even more complex biological tasks. Really, ESM3 and AlphaFold, they're really just the beginning. We're just scratching the surface of what's possible. ESM3 is like the Model T of protein engineering. We can expect to see the equivalent of Ferraris and spaceships and Teslas in the perhaps not too distant future. And we can also expect to see a rapid increase in the number of applications. Right now, we're talking about drug discovery, material science, carbon capture. But in a few years, once more smart people get their hands on it and attempt to apply it in their own sort of fields of expertise, who knows what other fields will be revolutionized by this technology? Because it is a very powerful technology. We're talking about manipulating the very building blocks of life. And of course, there could be a lot of potential risks and challenges that we need to be mindful of as we enter this uncharted territory. It's a crucial question that deserves very careful consideration. We need to be aware of some potential downsides. One big concern is, of course, the possibility of unintended consequences, right? We are kind of playing God here. When we start tinkering with complex biological systems, it's impossible to predict all the potential outcomes. Not only that, but it's important to think about potentials for misuse. As with any powerful technology, there's always the risk that it could be used for harmful purposes. A biological attack of some sort can be one of the scariest things that humans can come up with, just because of the potential for global spread very, very rapidly. But with all that said, I can't help but wonder, if you take a step back and consider some of the kind of deeper philosophical questions that this technology raises, what does it mean to be able to program life itself, right? And that's not some figurative language. I mean, it's kind of more or less literal. It does seem that life runs on a code of sorts, right? Amino acids forming into sequences, into little 3D structures, form proteins. Proteins are sort of these building blocks of life. Everything that life does, for the most part, is on proteins because of proteins. You also have DNA, which is a little bit different. They're not proteins, but they also have a code of sorts. DNA has its own version of letters and sentences and stories, etc. So if we're getting closer to be able to program life, are there some ethical boundaries we need to establish? Some safety boundaries? Are there some lines we shouldn't cross? For example, with genome editing, there's a sort of this global agreement for people researching that we're able to do gene editing on people, but not on anything that gets passed down to the next generation. So there's this idea of germline gene editing, right? And this is a very controversial process that alters the DNA in individuals' germ cells, right? Things such as eggs or sperm. And that creates genetic changes that are passed down to future generations, as opposed to genetic changes that die with that individual. They don't get passed down, right? So we as humans, as the entire globe kind of came together and said, well, we're not going to mess around with that. By the way, some people did, and they got in trouble for it, but the point is we drew that line. We didn't want to make some change that could really backfire and then spread throughout the population, continue to have offspring. We didn't know where that would lead, so we did not take that step. Are there similar sort of boundaries, certain lines we shouldn't cross with designing proteins? Let me know in the comments what you think. Certainly, this is exciting and a bit daunting. We're holding the keys to a really powerful engine here, and we need to drive it responsibly before we hit the gas. At the same time, I can't say that I'm not excited. I'm very excited to see how this AI in biology can lead to personalized medicine, maybe using this AI to tailor treatments to our individual unique genetic makeup. It would be like having a medical team dedicated solely to you, specifically to you. They went to Harvard where all the classes were about you, and they're able to craft the perfect treatment plan based on your specific needs. We could engineer crops that can thrive in harsh conditions, and of course, it could create harmful things like dangerous pathogens or even bioweapons. Me personally, I'm not too scared of rogue AI, that kind of a Terminator scenario that some people put forward. I'm a lot more scared of a rogue human with an advanced AI like this, creating some bioweapons that are more powerful and more deadly than anything that we've seen before. So we're either on the path to immortality or maybe complete extinction. I'm going off the rails a bit, so that's my cue to sign off. It's getting a little bit late here. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. My name is Wes Roth, and I'll see you in the next one.